Good evening. Welcome to the Bennington Select Board's special session to look at the water and sewer budgets and one other agenda item. We are happy to have you here tonight. My name is Donald Campbell. I'm the board chair, and I'd like to ask the members to please introduce themselves, starting with Bruce.
Good evening, Bruce Lee Clark.
I'm Jean Connor.
Hello, I'm Jeannie Jenkins.
Good evening. This is Jim Carroll.
Hi, Sarah Perrin.
We also have some staff with us here. Why don't we have our staff, starting with you, Stuart? Introduce yourselves, please.
I'm Stuart Hurd, Town Manager.
Dan.
I'm Dan Monks, Assistant Town Manager.
Melissa.
I'm Melissa Courier, the Finance Director.
Larry and RJ.
RJ Jolly, Director of Public Works.
Larry Gates, Assistant Director of Public Works.
And we also have Nancy Lively, who is always with us for excellent minute taking, and so she is with us here again tonight. Before we start this meeting, I would like to ask that we add one item to the agenda. So people, we have a need to go into an executive session on a personnel matter at the end. That's the only change that I would make to this agenda item, which is fairly simple: water, sewer, and budgets, and then the community policing, and then an executive session. So may I ask that for a motion to change the agenda that way, please?
So move.
Second.
Thank you, Sarah, for the second. All in favor, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we'll be having a short executive session, well, maybe short after the end of all of this. Before we start this meeting, I am going to put up on the screen the call-in number for this meeting, and that is how you participate in the meeting. So what the plan is tonight is to have this work session with our town staff on the water and sewer budgets, and then at the end we'll do board questions, and then we'll allow for citizen comment if there is any at the end. Then we are going to have our second agenda item, which is the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity proposal, and the board will discuss that, and we will accept public comment on that also before we vote. So the way you enter this meeting is to dial 1-646-558-8656. And when prompted, enter the meeting ID 872-2520-2556. Press pound sign twice, and you'll be entered into the waiting room, and we will allow you into the meeting in the order that your calls have come in. Okay, I'll try to put this up again as we get closer to the end of this agenda item. We will be on the water and sewer budgets for a little while. For those of you that are more interested in the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity proposal, that'll be coming, I don't know, maybe an hour from now or half an hour from now. I guess we don't really know exactly, but it'll be a little while before we get to that. So with that, Stuart, would you like to take us into this year's round of water and sewer budgets, please, and tell us what we can expect, and then we'll move into board discussion.
Sure thing. I mean, this year we're looking at two fund budgets, water and sewer, that are going to be greatly impacted by depreciation due to the projects that are being undertaken. In the water fund, it's the PFO-related projects. And we have one continuing line extension to try to deal with the low pressure areas in the community, and a need to increase reserves. In effect, the same is true for the sewer fund. We will have major increases in our depreciation given the upgrade of the sewer treatment plant. We will have the first bond payment coming online, and there are some operational cost increases as well. So we're looking at budgets that are impacted substantially, not by necessarily wages and benefits. Those have remained, those are as we proposed and are contracted in most cases. But the greatest differences are due to the increases in reserves, increases in depreciation. We're looking at a sewer fund budget that is up 10.5%. And remember, we committed to doing that for 3 successive years to anticipate this increase in depreciation and increase in reserves. And we were looking at a targeted increase for the water fund that was at 2 or 3%. I think we met those increases. I can't exactly remember the water fund increase, but both budgets benefit this year from the state's commitment to not charge the administrative fee and interest on the borrowing from the water resources funds. And in both projects, that's the source of the monies for all of our borrowings in both of these funds. So when we look forward to the rates, we're looking at a 0% increase in the rate in the water fund and an 8% increase in the rate in the sewer fund, not the 10.5 that we originally projected. And when we get through the budget, as we move through the highlights and stuff, I think we can explain how that happens. And I would look to Melissa to jump in when we get to those areas. So having said that, the sewer fund will receive an infusion from its fund balance and of 160,000 or so. And that's also to help us reduce the impact on the rates in that particular fund. So with that, I would open it up to discussion of the various highlights that we've shown to you and perhaps answer your questions and concerns.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Jim.
In the 4th paragraph, final sentence, Stuart says current fund balance is in excess of $5 million. Can you explain that, what that means?
Well, it means that we have a fund balance that has grown over the years, and I'm going to turn to Melissa to give us the details on that.
The fund balance is all of our assets. That includes our capital assets, as well as any of the assets that are listed in our general ledger. We are valued, our fund is valued at, and I don't have the exact number, but like Stuart said, over $5 million. So at a time like this, and we had planned on this last year, sometimes we consume some of that fund balance to help keep the rates down, if at all possible.
So Melissa, does that mean that is cash on hand?
No.
Okay.
The majority of that is capital assets. So, for example, the water fund, it was a $6 million project. So, and that's in the water fund. The amount for the sewer is changing as we work on the project.
Okay, thank you.
So I think the question Jim's getting at, or maybe this is where you're heading, Jim, and it's certainly something that is probably where we're going to end up. I went through this budget pretty carefully. It's a tight budget. There are not a lot of increases. All of your notes, I thought, were very good and very self-explanatory in many ways. If you look at sort of most of the budget's actually down. The water budget's down about $24,000. So this is to a really tight budget. Nothing really to complain about this. If we're just talking about the water part of it, I think the question will be when we get to the sewer part of it. What dictates how you figure that draw, that 160 draw. And maybe we can talk about that when we get to the sewer part of this. So why don't we, if the board has any questions on the, water budget, maybe I'll start. just because I love to pick on these things. But Stuart and Melissa, I do wonder about the contingency fund for new meters. You know, we've set it at 20,000 for a couple of years, but it looks like in 2019 we may have gone significantly over that. So I just worry that we're under budgeting a little bit. Do you have any reason to believe that we will be at the more modest number this year? So this is line 415920.79.
Yeah, I would turn to Larry Gates on that. Obviously, that this, because it is a contingency, it really depends on the number of meters that we are either purchasing and or replacing. When an individual installs a meter in their business or their home, they do it at their expense. They may buy the meter from us, but we have inventory available for that. But ultimately, once that meter is installed, it becomes the property of the town of Bennington. And we are responsible for reading it, repairing it, and ultimately, in some cases, replacing it. So I'd look to Larry to see what major expenses we had in the past year during this past FY20 that would have affected that.
Some of those meter sales were from the new PFOA expansion.
Thank you.
Purchased those. We did get reimbursed from them, so it shows up as revenue. It would be a wash. So we purchased a lot of meters for the PFOA section, which is some of the increase why it went over budget. And we'll have the same this year. We do the budget of 20, but a lot of the meters that we're buying for the next phase just came in, and that's a large purchase.
So Larry, is that likely to hit there are no budget numbers for revenue in 2021. Is that likely to hit the revenue side of this?
I'm not sure how that works, Melissa.
No.
We've invoiced them out, and we've been reimbursed from them from the contract, but I'm just not sure where they.
I apologize, but the report that I have in front of me does not show the revenue figures in there. There are revenue figures, and I don't have an updated one. An updated one wasn't provided to you.
So this budget that we have in front of us that has zeros in the FY221 budget is what you're referring to, Melissa?
Correct. I'm looking through my papers here to see if I have that.
Melissa, where is that income shown? Do you remember the line?
The income would normally show in labor and supply sales.
Labor and supply sales. Yeah, we show in FY19 a total of 21,000 in labor and supply sales. We don't yet have a full projection for 2020.
2021, you mean, right, Stuart? Looks like 2020 was 15.
Well, we didn't have the revenue there. And my mind doesn't have it either. But generally, as Larry said, this turns out to be a wash because we are ultimately reimbursed through the PFOA related project.
There are some meters that we will replace on our own. Do repairs. That's where a lot of that 20,000. If a big meter goes, a new meter is about like a 2-inch meter is $1,500. So we'll replace that meter with a new one. That would come out of our pocket at that point.
I have the figures that should be included in there. There are.
Melissa, if you don't mind, so that in case we want to try to adopt this budget tonight, let's start at the top at 412030 and go right down.
So I'm going to do that, but when we adopt this budget, we're adopting the expenditure side, not the revenue side, which is change. Okay.
But that way we will have all the information if we choose to vote on this. Thank you.
Yes. So in 412030, there is a budget of $10,000, or revenue $10,000. In 412450 permit fees, it's $200. In 2504 market sales is 98,000. In 412510 labor and supply sales is 15,000. In 412930 interest is 1,000. 412990 miscellaneous income 500. And in 412991 is the SVC South End project. The portion that the college pays towards that is 42,810. Now, I've skipped over the actual water rent. Water rent is based on the rate proposal that you approve. And that number, there's always some rounding in here, so that exact number might be different in my calculations, but what we have on the rate sheet that you have in front of you is 3, and this would be 412502 water rent is 3,040,720.
Okay, the others are zeros. The other 3 categories you skipped are zeros. Okay.
Yes.
So it looks like we're budgeting labor and supply sales are going straight across at 15,000. And you're saying that's where the new meters would be caught?
Yes.
Okay. Understanding that they're awash with other funds coming in. And Stuart, Melissa, what's the source of the final item, SVC South End project? What's the source on that?
That's the portion that Southern Vermont College has committed to paying us each year for the South End, where we put in the extension and the big tank there at SVC. They've committed to a portion of that, which amounts to this exact number each year for 20 years, 42,810. I believe this year is their 3rd year. We've received 3 payments, so FY21 would actually be the 4th year.
And so, Stuart, have there been any conversations on that?
There have not been. I think we were asked early on when the college was closing if there was a way to deal with that, and we basically indicated that is an agreement that the college agreed to, and it is assignable to the any new owner that comes along. So that is a constant, and we're not forgiving any of that payment or considering it.
And so, Melissa, do you have a total revenue number for us there? I can give you a minute if it, or we could move on to other things here while you.
I do not. I need a moment. If you want to move on, I'll give you that number.
So board members, as Melissa correctly pointed out, we're looking at the expense side here, not so much the revenue side. I didn't see too many places where there might be questions, although there may have been some questions. So does anyone have any questions about the water side of this budget? Look for hands if you do, or nod, shakes of head if you don't. Okay. Jim, you can just shake your iPad. All right. So seems possible, Stuart, that we may end up with a little bit of a hole here on that 42,000. I know that's a commitment, but
well, it may be a hole, but it is a debt that the college will carry if they don't pay it. But they, they've got to keep that building going. So they are, I think, as best they can to pay their debts and to pay ongoing expenses that are necessary. Some time ago, we heard there was a possibility of a new purchaser, but that hasn't been discussed or come to the fore in any of the recent past.
Well, I guess, Larry, I would turn to you just for a second then, or RJ. As I say, it's a pretty tight budget. Looks like expenses are down about $24,000 on this. Are we feeling pretty confident about the numbers in here?
Yes, I believe we are. We did sharpen our pencils in anticipation of having a tight budget, and when we had the savings of the loan administration fees and interest waived, then that was a huge savings for us. So made it so there was 0% increase, and it's looking good.
And I will say, Donald, if I could, that I give a huge tip of the hat to Larry Gates on this. He worked very, very closely with Melissa in developing this budget, and I give them both a lot of credit for bringing in both budgets in what I consider to be a reasonable increase. Yes, the state's decision certainly helped, but this takes hard work to make these things happen. And with all of the changes we see at the wastewater treatment facility, sometimes it's just doing your very, very best guesswork to understand what the impact might be in the long run.
Okay. Melissa, any updates from you, or you?
Oh yes, I have the water number. I was just jumping in a sewer.
Yeah. So where do we think we're going to land on at the end of the day with the?
The total revenue is $3,208,230.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So down a little bit from last year's budget.
They're very specifically for both water in the water fund and as well as sewer, but the delinquent interest fees I reduced based on my best estimate, because we are not charging those to the users this year. So that is a reduction on the water side of $14,000 of delinquent interest fees.
Well, this may come up when we talk about sewer budgets too, but so what's the policy, Stuart, in terms of how long do we carry that through this COVID pandemic?
Initially, we asked to be able to carry it for for 2020, for the entire year. So it'll overlap into the next fiscal year, which is why you see the reduction here in this proposal. And then we'll make a determination come probably December or January of next year as to what we need to do. And I think a lot of that will really depend on, if there is in fact a solid recovery, if in fact people are getting back on their feet, then that's a question we would have to answer then. I wouldn't dare try to project it now.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, seeing the revenue number, budget's down a little bit, revenue's down a little bit. Yes, this looks like a 0% budget increase to me. So I guess why don't we move on to the sewer budget? Unless there are any questions from the board, I don't see any. Sewer budget's maybe a little bit more interesting to people. Stuart, go ahead. I guess you've given us. So the gist is, we did agree a couple years ago that we were going to do a 10.5% increase for 3 years in a row to get caught up and to get through this sewer plant, which we had to do. The state, it was not optional at that point. We were polluting the river. It was, we had to do it, and we did do it. We did it. Our crew did a great job. Saved us some serious money doing it by working so hard. We're thankful for that. But nevertheless, we have some bills to pay. But what you're saying is that instead of doing the 10.5% increase last year, this year, and next year, that we would just do 8% this year and then go back to 10.5% next year. Is that your suggestion?
And yes, but remember when these costs that we have in a sense returned to the ratepayers this year, they will be back next year unless things continue to go badly and the state deems it essential to waive them again. So yes, certainly we'll be recovering, and we'll see an increase in FY22 more in the 10.5% range.
And then what happens after that?
Well, that would be, I think, the second year of our 10.5. It would actually be the third year. I guess we would have to assess it then as to whether or not we need to continue at that pace. I mean, we really, even though we've reduced the impact on rates through this savings, we're still budgeting the full amount for depreciation. We're still budgeting the necessary reserves in this 8% increase. So I'm expecting that after FY22, we will see our budget increases and rate increases drop down significantly into the 2 and 3% range if we're fortunate that we don't have any unforeseen difficulties in either of the systems.
All right. Well, so I'll start out if the board allow me. I have one question, which is I think probably for you, Melissa. I'm looking in Stuart's notes. He mentions a line, the purchase of a new loader and a new truck, 42,5420.83, and I don't see that line in this budget. Would that be showing up somewhere else?
Yes. So the way that the budgets work is that all capital purchases, all as well as transfer to reserve, are included in 41,59,40,840. You'll see $647,000 there, $647,550, and let's see.
I see. Both of them are back in the water budget.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at water. I'm looking at sewer now.
Yeah, I've switched to sewer. Yeah,
So sorry. So in the sewer fund, you will see in 42, 54, 40, 840. The 137,000. Nope, I'm sorry, 237,040. I don't know why this is so much more difficult when we're doing this through Zoom.
I'm sorry.
You'll see $237,040.
Okay.
If you go to the next page, the color-coded page in the presentation, you'll see that the FY21 is highlighted green, and you'll see the line 237,040. It's the capital asset schedule, and it's all of those items listed that are highlighted in green that make that up. And that includes the loader, net of the loan that we received from People's Bank through the state's highway fund. The loader
doesn't get listed individually in this.
No, it does not.
No.
Okay.
In truth, though, Donald, when as you move through the budget status throughout the year, when those expenses are made, they show up as an equipment purchase. So it makes the budget status look very, very difficult, if you don't mind me saying so.
Right.
But in the end, those are then transferred to the asset schedule, and the budget comes back into balance. So you will see the impact when it's purchased.
Stuart is right on target with that, and what happens is the asset gets capitalized and it gets moved to the balance sheet, so that the only thing that you actually see in the budget status at the end of the fiscal year is actually the depreciation cost.
Right. Okay. All right. I see the 237,040, so that jives. Okay. I had one other question. Maybe this is Melissa, or maybe this is Larry. Again, sort of a big drop in other purchase services. So 42,5480.56 looks like it went from 115,000 last year to 37,000 this year. Is that related to the rehab costs?
No, that is related to switching over to composting. There used to be two lines in there, one for Hoosick Water Quality District to take our sludge, and one was for TIM for trucking the sludge. So those were about, I think it's $78,000 between the two of them.
I see.
We're not paying it now.
So is the 37,040 about what it costs to truck away the stuff that comes from the head screen? What's that thing called? The screen at the very beginning? It filters out the plastic and all the...
No, that was our dewatered sludge that we off the press. We used to press it and have dewatered sludge, and then we truck it to Hoosick Water Quality District where they would compost it. By us opening our compost facility back up, it saved all the trucking and the cost to dispose of our sludge to Hoosick Water Quality District.
Yeah, that's a great. That was a great move, and I had a chance to visit that with some of the with some college students a while ago, and it was really very impressive what's going on down there. But there's still 37,000 left in that line item. Is that is that for hauling away the garbage that does get filtered out of the sewage?
No, that's for, some of it is for the cleaning of the sewers. We hire with a truck that comes in. Actually, they're in town this week. Some pump station cleaning, traffic control, and some sewer main televising.
Donald, we truck our material, our finished compost material up to the transfer station now and mix it in with our topsoil. We do our own trucking on that now. And we also truck both ways. We truck the mulch that we grind up the trees and the brush at the transfer station and bring those to the compost facility at the sewer plant, and which neither one of those materials costs us money, which is also not very nice.
That's great. That's your carbon to not get the compost going. Yeah.
Right.
Great. Well, so I'm not sure if board members have questions here, but I mean, at some level, the hard part about this budget is that it's up 192,000 over last year, but transfer to reserve and depreciation take us up almost $300,000. Just so we have to make sure that we have the nerve to continue to hold the budget to the transfer to reserves and the depreciation on this. It feels to me. I don't see any other places where we can do a lot of jiggling on this budget, but I'm open to other board members' questions if you have them. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, this is just a simple question. I'm not sure if I may have missed it, but I wondered on the principal. I see the principal and interest have been paid off on the dump truck. I'm just wondering how many years that has left. Sorry, for payment.
In the water fund? Or sewer fund?
Sewer
Here's
fund.
the water fund.
Oh, you're back at the water fund? Okay, sorry.
That, last year was our final payment on that. So it's paid off.
And Sarah, maybe is your question, how many more years can they expect to run that truck? Is that the question?
No, I was fairly vague at first, sorry.
Okay. Jean, go ahead.
Melissa, this is probably for you. I'm assuming the actuals for both funds are, running where you expected them to be. I know the year is not quite done.
The water fund is definitely on track, but we are struggling in the sewer fund, in the wastewater fund. I've been working very closely with Larry to monitor that, and Larry has been cutting projects planned for this year. I think he can speak to this better than I can, but there were a lot of unexpected chemical costs this year that threw the budget out of whack, and there may be some other things. Larry, do you have anything to add?
During the upgrade, we had to keep things running, and it did cost us quite a bit of money in chemicals to adjust pHs and just kind of keep the whole plant running.
Can't put the sludge away.
And haul some of the liquid sludge away. Did cost us quite a bit of money doing that also. While the digesters were shut down, we couldn't really dewater, so we hauled our liquid sludge to Schenectady wastewater plant, and they took that for us.
I can't
We
hear you.
can't hear you. You have to move right up, I think, or speak a little more loudly, Jean, if you can.
Hear me now?
No. Try again. Okay, Jean is going to, I think, log out and log back in. Pleasures of doing this by computer. So
While she's doing that,
go ahead, Bruce. Yep, thank you.
Melissa, would you mind? I know we're not talking about income, but again, it's nice to see what they are under the sewer fund, where we've got nothing but zeros for FY 2021. Do you have those as well?
Yes.
Oh,
Are you ready?
I'm as ready as I'll ever be.
Okay. 42-20-30 for interest, $6,000. 42-24-50 permit fees, $300. 42-25-10 for labor and supply sales, $5,000. 42-25-20 for septage received is $10,000. 42-29-30 interest, $500. And 42-29-90 miscellaneous income is $5,000. The sewer rents, which is 42-25-01, is 24-35-660. That is a total of $2,462,460.
Thank you.
So up significantly from last year because of the new usage.
Yeah, it's basically depreciation and transfer to reserves are the major increases.
I'm sorry, I was talking about the income.
Yeah.
The income side being the
I see.
Yeah.
Jumped the gun there. Sorry about that.
No, that's right. Income's up fairly substantially, over $100,000, 150,000, something like that.
Right. Well, that's assuming the rates that we haven't voted on yet. I'm
Right.
assuming.
Right.
Yes. If it didn't go up, I'd worry.
Well, a lot of
Okay.
times our usage goes down, causing it to go down.
Yes, I
So-
understand that.
Yeah, Melissa, it's something of a this must be like Groundhog Day for you, and that we always come back to it. We always ask you about this, but you know, it really does get down to transfer to reserve and depreciation. So we need your talk on being the adults in the room when it comes to those things.
Well, we talked about fund balance a little while ago, and how fund balance is made up of our capital assets. But fund balance is also us building a reserve to cover our capital assets. That's what it is. It's building a reserve for depreciation or by depreciation. So even though we did plan we planned this last year to consume some of it to help get us through the wastewater upgrade. It's not the best choice to continually consume your fund balance, because that's the reserve for when 30 years from now, or however long it is, when we need to replace something, that we need to be able to use those funds to do so. Because depreciation was not booked prior to me coming to the town of Bennington, we are kind of behind the 8 ball as far as our fund balance and being able to cover that. The hope would be, and in a perfect world, that we always book depreciation at the full amount so that we would not have to go to bond for a major project. Does that help, Donald? Is that what you're looking for?
That is what I'm looking for, and I think that maybe is just a reminder to the board and everybody listening that this is about bond avoidance, right? So this is trying to get into a situation. This is like living within your means, trying to get to a situation where we have the fiscal austerity to not have to do big bonds, or or to minimize bonding, I guess, when it comes time to have to do this work over again. So it's kind of the ant and the grasshopper. Which do we want to be? And it's hard. It's hard having the rates go up 8%, although it's a lot better than having the rate go up 10.5%. But these transfer to reserves and depreciation are real things. These are real things that affect our future. And so I guess I would ask the board if you have any questions for Melissa at this point. I don't see where we could change this budget anywhere else, but in the way we treat that. And I would advocate for following the town's guidance on this, because it took a long time to get select board switched over to the point that we were able to try not to kick the can down the road. And we have been trying to do that, notwithstanding the $160,000 draw, though, Melissa, right? So that draw does represent something of a little bit of a borrowing from that responsibility.
It does. And when I did the forecast last year, there were, it wasn't flat with the bond from the upgrade. In the first year, we were paying, for the first 2 years, it was interest only on the bonds, which was, could be a lesser amount. But then we also had the depreciation, which would peak in the first year, but then not so much in the next year. But then in the third year, the bond payment for the wastewater upgrade would come in with the principal amount as well. So in knowing that and trying to keep the percentage that we were proposing at 10.5% and keep it flat, we chose to dip into the fund balance to achieve that. And that was projected at about $164,000, which we've kept in this budget, along with the savings from the state not charging for the interest and admin fees.
Right. So I don't know if I've cut everybody else on the board off by going directly to those numbers, but are there any other questions from the board on this? Larry, RJ, anything else on the sewer budget that you feel like we need to know on the expense side?
I don't believe so. I think you got it all. I think that's it.
I think that's it also. Just FYI that Kingsbury moved back in today. and hopefully be wrapping up all the loose ends over there on the project upgrade.
That's good news, RJ.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys got that fixed. I think my daughter was swimming in the Walloomsac River somewhere downstream of the sewer plant. I'm not sure she knew the sewer plant was there, and I was glad we'd fixed all that. So, Stuart, would you like us to try to pass the expense side of this budget tonight? I'm not.
Yes, I would. That would allow us then to ensure that the calculations on the rates that we would present to you next week would be accurate, and not that Melissa would ever do anything inaccurately, but if you're going to propose changes to these budgets, then we've got calculations to make over the next week. If you adopt the budgets now, that means we know where we are, and we'll be prepared to recommend the rates that we have talked about tonight next week.
Jeannie, I see you have your hand up.
I'm just wondering if you want to put the call-in number up in case there are any comments from the public.
Thank you for the reminder. You are the best vice chair a person could have. Here comes the call-in number. So if you have questions about either of these budgets, we don't have a motion on the floor at this point. If you have questions about either of these budgets, you should be dialing in 646-558-8656. And the meeting ID is 872-2520-2556, and enter the pound sign twice when prompted, and you'll be in the waiting room. And I see that there is somebody in the waiting room now. I don't know if that person wants to talk about water and sewer budgets, but why don't I'm going to put this number down, and I'm going to admit this caller into our meeting. Caller ending in 573. I've admitted you into the Bennington Select Board meeting. Welcome. And before I unmute you, I just would ask that you try to make an effort to turn down either your computer volume or your TV volume or your radio volume, however you're listening to this program on Cat TV. If you turn that down now, before I unmute you, then things will go a lot better. So I'm going to unmute you now and welcome you to the Bennington Select Board meeting. If you got a question about the water or the sewer budgets.
My question is about can you hear me, Donald?
Yes, I can. Please tell us who we're talking to.
Yeah, this is Rachel Blumenthal. My question is about the proposal from Curtis Reed.
Great. Rachel, we're going to get to that in a minute. I'm sorry to leave you in the waiting room, but do you mind if I put you back in there and then go ahead and turn your volume up and follow along?
Yep, that's good.
We're going to finish the water and sewer budget first, then let the staff go home, and then we'll take that up if that's okay with you.
Yep, no, that's fine.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'll put you back in the waiting room. Thank you. Yep. I have a second caller, which I'm going to admit. This caller just called in, and caller ending in 311. I'm just about to unmute you. Before I do, I'd ask you to turn down the volume on your computer so that we don't have any feedback noise. But here I go, unmuting you and welcoming you to the Bennington Select Board meeting. Please give us your name and tell us what your thoughts are on water and sewer budgets.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is Mary Garrison. I also was calling about the next item. I just wanted to get in line, so okay. I apologize.
No apology, Mary. It's so tough to get the sequencing right on this, and I really appreciate you two hanging in there. I'll put you back in the waiting room and enter you when we get to that subject, okay?
That's great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we are, nobody wants to talk about budgets in this town. Am I the only person that likes to talk about budgets?
I'd like to, I think we should do these separately, just for cleanliness sake.
Sounds good. Why don't you kick us off here, Bruce?
Yeah, so I'll make a motion to approve the water budget as presented.
Do I hear a second?
Second that.
Sarah, thank you very much. Do we have any further discussion? I see nobody in the waiting room. I see no public comment. Bruce, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I'm in toying with whether I should ask this question or not. I don't know even whether it's a question we can, that there's an answer to, but, you know, we're extending the water system, you know, relatively greatly considering the size of the system anyway. Does in general, if somebody could get, cause this partly because somebody asked me the question and I couldn't answer it. How does this expansion due to the PFOA situation, how does that impact our need for depreciation, you know, whatever, and also usage? Is that, do they basically, does this all balance out? I'm just trying to figure out how to even talk about it. And Stu, that may be for you.
Bruce, I'm going to say that's a more vague question than I'm used to hearing from you. But Stu,
I know, well, I don't even know how to ask the question, but it really has to do with, you know, we're expanding the system substantially. That means we're going to have people paying for water, but it also means we have more pipes in the ground. Therefore, we have more equipment in essence. And therefore, we have more need for fund balances and et cetera. So how does that all work itself out? And are we able to project what that's going to look like 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road?
I'll let Melissa address the development of the depreciation. What the expansion does for us, Bruce, is it gives us more customers. We obviously, given the Bulls Brook at 4.1 million gallons a day and Morgan Spring at 2.1 million gallons a day, we have more than sufficient water to supply the people we are tying into the system. The system is also capable of providing that water to them at the pressures mandated by the Vermont Health Department. So we have more customers. It should actually, if water usage rises, it should actually reduce the individual rates in the long run, because we have now more customers paying for the same budget. And then what impacts that then is how do you count in that depreciation? And what are we using, Melissa, 75 years for the pipes in the ground? I don't remember.
I think that's right.
That is correct. It's 75 years.
So go ahead. You take it.
So, Bruce, I have definitely worked with Larry Gates and the engineer at MSK to give me an estimate of the cost, because once that's put in, does become our asset, and we do have to book the depreciation on it. I've also, in the rate calculation, adjusted for the number of additional connections, both taking into consideration, some of them are flat rate versus some of them are meter. And I was able to get that information. So that has all been included in the calculation, and has been, you know, the struggle over the past few years with us having these major projects, the South End, all of them, including the PFOA, that have increased our depreciation substantially. Fortunately, the pipes that are put in, Larry, help me, what that's called, I can't remember. Thank you. Ductile iron piping does have a very long useful life, and it is at 75 years. So it does take, you know, those $1 million tickets and reduce it substantially, but it is still a hit to our depreciation that we need to fund.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Other discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call the vote here. I guess I would ask you all to unmute yourselves. All of those who would like to support the motion as stated on the expense side of the water budget, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, so that's passed. What's the next pleasure of the board here? Would somebody like to make a motion on the sewer budget?
I'll make a motion that we accept the sewer budget.
Do I hear a second? Thank you, Jean. Okay, discussion. Sarah, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Question, next year when this goes up to 10.5, would it be worth exploring the options tax again?
Interesting question. I think the option, if the local option tax was available to us, the income from that, you could, in effect, commit some of the funds to some of these projects that we attempt to do. Remember, the water and sewer funds are considered to be more like a normal business fund. You're projecting your cash to cover your expenses. So if you had excess funds available, you could potentially pull all of the project and capital costs out of these budgets in a given year and thereby reduce the rates if you had it.
Thank you.
And if we don't, it has to come from ratepayers. That's it can't really come from the general taxpayer. It comes from the users. So that's where we're stuck there. All right. Other questions from the board? Jim, I can't see your face, but you pretty settled with everything?
I am, and I thank Sarah for reminding us about the option tax. We could have really used that this year and in the coming year, and I'm ready to take up that fight again.
All right. Well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But so what we're looking at is an 8%, roughly 8% increase this year. But we'll see what that does to the rates and approve or reject them at our next meeting, right, Stuart? Is that what you're suggesting?
That's correct. We'll be ready.
Okay. Okay, motion's on the floor to approve the expense side of the sewer budget. I'm going to call the question here. So please unmute yourselves. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, so the water and sewer budget expenses have been passed. Larry and RJ, thank you very much for being here. It's much less fun doing it like this with you than in person. I'm hoping that maybe come winter we'll have a chance to have meetings in person again, but thank you very much for joining us anyway. And Melissa, always a pleasure having you on with us. It's this is hard stuff for those of us that don't touch it that often, but you make it easy to understand, and we're grateful for that.
Thank you for your support.
Okay, so we're gonna Stuart, unless there's any other action you need or any other conversation or any other
no, we're on to the next item here.
Okay. All right, so the next item has to do with it backs up to the IACP report, which we've received, and our recommendations on how we might proceed from the community, and our, I guess, realization that we as a select board don't have a great deal of experience. We have no experience in rolling something like this out, and our need for some guidance, asking for some help on this from somebody who has both experience and depth in dealing in this really kind of difficult area of police reform. Before we go there, I would like to say that both of the vigil that was Saturday night and the Black Lives Matter protest that was on Sunday were both well attended, and they were both peaceful and respectful. And it's nice that the police were able to be there to stop traffic. I appreciated the fact that they were able to do that, and appreciated all the people that showed up to make to express their opinions, and that we could kind of do that as a community. But think the board has pivoted a little bit, and we actually started a while ago, well before George Floyd's death, but we've kind of pivoted to this realization that we really do want to see reform in our policing, even at the small local level. And this isn't Minneapolis, this is Bennington, with fraction the size, fraction the budget, but we do want to see significant reform in our policing. And so this board has expressed itself, not in a vote, but each individual has expressed their general support for moving forward with the IACP project. And so we asked town staff to reach out to our consultant, the fellow who had helped us get this far and had led us to believe that IACP would be the best consulting firm for us. His name is Curtis Reed. He has an entity called the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity, a nonprofit over in Brattleboro. He's helped police forces and state police forces all over the state. And he has tremendous depth in this field. And so we had reached out to him and asked him for some help. And I would like to say that I know that this work is not without controversy in the community. We get a lot of emails and calls from both sides on this, but this, at least my opinion is, and I believe the board shares this opinion, that this is vital work. This is really important for us to do as a community. It's not a criticism of the men and women that work in our police department. It's a criticism of policing in general in the country and the sort of where policing's gotten since 9/11, and our desire to see it be a little bit more community-based and a little less post 9/11. So one of the things that I did was to reach out to some contacts, and before we even start this, I'd like to just say that there's a cost to hiring good consultants. It's not inexpensive to get somebody like Curtis Reed to help you. He's worth every penny. I trust Curtis deeply. I have come to trust Curtis deeply by working with him, and I really encourage everybody else to trust Curtis deeply. He is he's a man of great depth and even greater conviction. But so while I believe he's worth every penny, I also know that his proposal could have been a shock to our budget. Spent some time reaching out to various people in the community, and a number of individuals have agreed to help fund this work so that cost should not be the issue here for this board. People are willing to donate money towards seeing us work through this process. So for anyone who feels that this is an expense the town can't bear, or that don't want to see taxpayer money going forward, or all the different criticisms I've heard, I would say, of the roughly $24,000 or $25,000 that this would cost, $20,000 of that would be covered through local people who believe in Bennington and believe in this process and believe in police reform, and believe that Curtis can get us there. So I wanted to start out by taking the money side of it off the table, and instead pivoting to what kind of meaningful change could come out of this, and what the work group, which is Jeannie, Jean, and Bruce, feel like this proposal could do for our community. So, sort of a long introduction, Jeannie, but I did want to offer that up, and I guess I'd turn it over to you to talk about this. And I've got it on my computer, so I can put it up on the screen at any moment if you like. But why don't you just tell me when to put it up, and I will when you say so.
Okay, all right. So thank you, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for working on finding funding for this proposal. So as you said, Jean, Bruce, and I are bringing to the board a proposal from the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity that will allow us to map the community process to implement the recommendations that were put forward in the IACP assessment. We strongly support this proposal, and we hope that you will as well. The draft proposal came before us last last week, Bruce and Jean and I had a chance to sit down, pull together our questions, and then meet with Curtis Reed and talk with him about the process and our concerns. And we feel like the proposal that we have, that the community has and the select board has in front of them tonight is one that will really benefit all of us. If you want to put up the deliverables, that'd be great. The proposal includes 4 deliverables that we think are really excellent. First, professional development and coaching of the select board and the town staff, town and police leadership. Second, mapping a community process for implementation of the IACP recommendations. Third, creating a joint town and community-driven vision and mission statement for the Bennington Police Department. And then fourth, structuring a process and providing the tools for 2 research teams to examine first a civilian review board or commission to complement law enforcement oversight, and second, a community policing, looking at community policing practices in rural communities. So the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity is also willing to help us determine how best to use the 40 hours of offsite or remote assistance that we have from the IACP still. So the cost for moving forward, which as Donald shared is covered, would be $21,700 to the Vermont Partnership for Fairness and Diversity, and then a total of $3,000 that would be that would cover 6 stipends to researchers. So the total for the work would be a maximum of $24,700. The intent is for all of the work to be completed within 6 months. I'm not going to go through the timeline. It's in the proposal, but the intent is to move forward really quickly. If we're able to approve this proposal tonight, Curtis Reed and Dr. Mary Gannon would like to have a community kickoff next Wednesday night, which would be June 24th at 7 p.m. via Zoom, and that would be carried by Cat TV. So I guess that's a really quick overview, and I think I want to stop there and let the other members of the select board and the community have, ask any questions that they have.
If I may suggest, Jeannie, why don't, if other members of the team want to speak first, if you have anything, Jean or Bruce, go ahead. If not, we could move to questions from the board on this.
Well, do you want us to go ahead and share other work that's ongoing right now, or do you want to stay on the proposal at this point?
Well, it might either. It might help people to know where we are. We have 3 people in the waiting room, so I am anxious to get to allowing public comment on this. We know there are 2 people that have been hanging in there for almost an hour in the waiting room. Yeah. But without wanting to rush this whole process, it would be good for, I think, us to hear both from other team members if there is anything we need to hear from them, and for you to update us on what you're doing. And then let's do board questions on the proposal. So board, while these updates are coming, I want you to be kind of multitasking and thinking about what questions, if you haven't already written them down, what you might have for this work team on the proposal.
So I think just really quickly, the town is creating a section on the town website that will be under community resources, that will be community policing. And what we already have up on the website are the IACP report, as well as the proposal that we're talking about right now. The town is adding the IACP model policies. They might already be up there. And also a resource list that IACP sent us. And I think I'll stop there and turn it over to Jean.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so I've been in touch with both of the libraries, and both of them are ready and willing and actually have already been working on reading materials, resources that they recommend, and are willing to post the lists on each of their websites. And then in addition to that, I'll be requesting that SVSU does the same thing when we meet with them on Wednesday morning this week. Just for another opportunity is the Vermont Humanities book this year is called The Hate You Give. And both libraries are going to be collaborating with other organizations in town and going to be having public discussion groups and breakout groups to talk about that book. They do that anyway, but this year it happens to be just the perfect choice, kind of coincidentally. The North Bennington Library, they're going to have a list of resources on their website at the end of the week. The Bennington Free Library, it's already there. It's a little bit difficult to find, but you're supposed to go on their homepage and scroll down to latest news and then look for the heading Current Issues Library Recommended Resources. And I should say, the lists that both of the libraries are going to be posted are lists that they've gotten from professional library organizations. It's not necessarily lists that they've come up with on their own, but these resources have already been vetted and proven to be valuable for the community. I think that's kind of all I have to say about that. Donald, I just want to thank whoever that person is or people are who are willing to donate. That is just fabulous news. And as a person who's been in development for many years, we need to think of a way to thank them. My thought on the whole proposal is we have one chance in this community to do this right. And $20,000 is a lot of money, but this community deserves Curtis. We need Curtis. And I think every dollar that we spend to have him help us is money well spent. I think he's an amazing resource, and I plan on leaning on him heavily, personally. So that's all I have to say. Anything else anybody wants to know?
Bruce, Jim has his hand up, but I'd like to give you an opportunity to get in.
And I'll be very brief. What Jean was talking about with regard to the libraries, I've been working on with the interfaith community and with the Peace and Justice folks. So I will be and looking out at any other community organizations who have websites. One of the things that I'm looking and asking for is their willingness to allow the town to create a fast link from the town's website to these other websites, and I know the libraries will do that. And I haven't had anybody from any of the faith communities come to me and say, no, they don't want to do that. In addition, they will be working on, some already are, but others will be working on ways to, and with community discussions, book discussions, resource discussions, and they will be vetting their own materials as they go.
Thank you. That's great. And before I let Jim in, I just want to flag in a certain amount of humility. This board knows that there's a lot that we don't know, and there are a lot of people that we're not as connected to as we should be. So it's great that you three are starting out with the connections you have, and that we're able to make as much information available and get as many people involved as we can. But I think part of hiring Curtis is really stretching beyond that and making sure that we are welcoming the whole community into this conversation. If I could offer that opinion. Jim, you've had your hand up for a while. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased with the overall structure of this. However, I think there's a feeling out there in the general community that it can't happen fast enough. Be that as it may, one of the things that one of the 25 suggestions that IACP recommended was the reevaluation and updating of policies in the police department. And I'd like to see that get underway as quickly as possible and have the chief come before us on a regular basis to offer us, a comparison and contrast, and the consultancy of Curtis on the updating of those policies. I think it would go a long way. And the public's mind that we're working on this, and it's not just being pushed aside while we prepare for this. And that's it.
Mr. Chair?
Just a minute, Bruce, I'm going to say I saw Jeannie's hand up a little bit before yours, so I'm going to go ahead and send it to Jeannie, and then Jeannie, go ahead and send it to Bruce when you're
Yeah,
finished.
I think we're probably going to tag team on this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so so Curtis's proposal does not include policy, and we happen to have a policy wonk on our select board in the name of Bruce. So we have, as we said, we have put up the IACP model policies. Bruce has been doing a lot of research, and I'll let you speak for yourself. But Jim, we totally agree. It's not an area that we plan to leave for later.
No, Jim, it can't be something that we leave for later. But one of the things that I think we all have to be really clear about is how policy gets made and who gets to have voice in that process. And one of the things I take from the IACP report is that the community gets to have voice in that process. And so, it would be really easy to assign some person to redo policies, but that's not really how one gets ownership in a broad sense. So I think one of the things that will come out of the initial stages of these deliverables, as we say, I would think within a few weeks, is really a core group of persons who would be willing to do some work on policy with the chief or with his designee and with me and others with particular skills. So one of the things that we can do is draw into these discussions, for example, people who have a particular skill set, for example, working with people who are in mental health crisis. And I've already had, because I have these conversations regularly with somebody else at UCS, I already had someone there say, are we going to be able to be involved in that discussion when the time comes? And I said, that's precisely what the IACP had in mind. That's what Dr. Lee suggested to me personally. And so we are going to do this. The policy piece is really important, but it's also illustrative of how we want to work on this from a community base. That's really important. The police will handle the stuff that flows from the policy, but the policies themselves will be worked on just like policies everywhere, with a broad variety of people engaging in the conversation and using models. I hope that's helpful.
It is.
Thank you, Jim. We got a lot of help, and we have some help coming from IACP. They certainly are one of the places that cutting edge policy comes from. Jean, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I did. It just occurred to me, I know everyone is wanting to move along at a faster pace than apparently we're moving, but involving the community is so critical in making sure we get to a good outcome at the end of this process. But doing that is inherently going to slow the process down, and that's completely appropriate and what we should be doing. But if it, like Bruce said, if we were just assigning a person to do this and another person to do that, I mean, we would be moving along really, really quickly. But because we're painstakingly, wanting to involve the community every step of the way, it is going to make it take longer. And I am perfectly fine with that. And I think everyone else is too.
Sarah, go ahead.
I have to echo what Jim said. I think it's instrumental that we bring in leadership from the police department with the entire select board to talk with us, to let us know where they're at, to bring in these discussions about even policy, pretty much just the entire discussion that we're having now when we start working with Curtis and let him lead, but with the entire select board as well. Mm-hmm. And I still have other questions, but we have callers on the line.
I do think you bring up tangentially, you bring up some good points, but Jim, I guess what I would say, I feel impatient too. I know a lot of people in the community feel impatient, but Curtis is really coaching us to be careful and to take this in measured steps and to try to be thoughtful so that we end up with a very useful product at the end. And I guess my suggestion is, especially if we're going to hire somebody who's done this a lot and is known to be good at this and can be trusted to do a good job, that we're not predetermined too much about this. Caller several weeks ago talked about mapping the process, and I think getting Curtis in to help us with that process mapping is really an important step, because there are a lot of things that we just don't know about this. So that's step 2 in the deliverables. Reimagine the suggested IACP action plan to provide for greater community involvement, delineating sequential actions and actions which can be implemented in a parallel fashion, and suggested timeline. That's really where the sort of mapping happens, and that happens according to this timeline within a week after the conclusion of the select board and the town leadership kind of getting centered with Curtis. So unless there are other questions, I'd like to start letting some callers in. We know who the first 2 are, but there are 3 waiting. I actually know who the third one is too, because I recognize her number. But we are going to, if everyone's okay with this, I'd like to admit the first caller. And oops, I forgot to mute the caller. So the caller is muted. And caller ending in 573, I'm going to ask you to turn down your computer, turn down your TV, whatever it is that's running in the background. And please give us your name again and tell us what you're thinking about this next step in our police reform process here. Okay, so I'm going to unmute you, caller ending in 573.
This is Rachel Blumenthal. I live in North Bennington.
Welcome.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts and some questions. I want to thank Bruce Lee for that comment, because this kind of sums up some of what I want to talk about, but the importance of having voice in this process is really crucial. My hope is that for this process to be as collaborative as possible. And after reading Mr. Reed's proposal, it was unclear to me how collaborative this process is actually going to be. So some clarification would be helpful. One of the things I was unclear about, is he trying to form 1 or 2 community research groups? Are we talking about 3 people or 6 people?
We're talking about 6, Rachel. It is unclear in the way it's worded in the first instance, but it would be two committees, research groups working at the same time on those 2 questions. So 6 separate people.
Okay, so thank you for clarifying that. And then my next question is, how will you choose who those members will be? Who will be doing the choosing, and is there a criteria?
Yes, so one of the requirements, one of the deliverables in the proposal or action steps is for the partnership to come up with job descriptions for those research positions. They will be essentially temporary employees of the town. So they will need to apply. Anyone interested will apply for the position. The review committee is not completely worked out, but we do know that it would include Curtis Reed and it would include Stu Hurd. I think probably it would include a select board member as well. And we had a lot of conversation with Curtis Reed, and I'll say, Bruce and Jean, you're welcome to jump in as well, about making sure that the process for soliciting interest in those positions did not preclude individuals who might not have written a resume in recent times, or that it was a broader search, and that we really think about how we solicit input for those positions.
Yeah, Rachel, I think the operative terminology in terms of trying to bring people in to discuss this was really it's an open casting call. If you get that sort of image, so that we're not really, I don't think anybody is trying to prejudge what that is, although I would hope that there will be sort of the partnership would bring forth what they believe the criteria ought to be. I think we will have a chance to say something about that. And I would hope that the community will have a chance to say give some suggestions about that. But in the meantime, what I see is this is an really open process to find those 6 individuals. The other key about that is that it's really important that they're community people so that they will come back being at least as knowledgeable as anybody else in the town about, and I mean that really, about those 2 topics, so that they can carry weight in any kind of discussion. I hope that helps.
Yeah, so that's helpful. So my third question is, why is the research group only made up of community members, and why not have select board and some police members also part of this group? Because I would think that, and again, it goes back to collaboration and having all those voices at the table, and I would think that the select board and police, as members of that group, would be able to ask questions. They look through a different lens, and so they would bring different questions to that research, and that with all those different perspectives, we'd have better information to move forward with with the best plan for our community.
So Rachel, the way that Curtis outlined it is that he's actually going to be coming with the job description, but also then working with the selected individuals on how to do this research. So the role of the 6 individuals will be to gather information to bring back to the community for community discussion. And so, if questions come up that no one anticipated, then obviously there can be follow-up. But the goal here is really to have community members become as professional in their researching as possible. So there will be plenty of time for conversation, but this first step is really going out, doing interviews, knowing what questions to ask, how to ask them, how to record the responses, so that information can come back, and we have sort of an apples to apples, information coming in that the community can then work from.
Yeah, so I would just ask again, I think the research and the information is going to be the basis from which so many decisions will be made. And again, I just feels like the more collaborative at that stage, and maybe it's mostly community members, but why there is not a select board person and somebody from the police department also part of that group just seems could really broaden the depth of conversation and the questions and the information. again, I go back to collaborative, how many voices are at the table? And given the importance of the research as the foundation from which, you know, we're going to move forward, it just seems like everybody should be part of that also at some.
So Rachel, I would suggest that you ask that question next Wednesday. So my understanding of what Curtis Reed is doing at the kickoff next Wednesday at 7 p.m. is to go through the proposal, say, here's what here's what he's outlining, and then take questions. And, you know, I think your points are good ones. So I think please raise it at that community meeting and, and hear what his thoughts are, or, you know, if he feels like that we should adapt the proposal. I think, you know, either way is fine with us. I think we're taking his lead on this. So please feel free to keep asking the question.
Okay, yeah, all right, I will ask him that on that evening. Thank you, that's what I had.
Rachel, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Sorry you had to hang out in the waiting room for so long, but we appreciate you being part of this conversation.
All right, no problem. Thank you, Donald.
Take care. So I'm going to let the next caller in, board members, and before I unmute this caller, I'm going to ask this caller if they would be sure, caller ending 311, be sure to turn down their television, be sure to turn down their radio, their computer volume, so that we don't have any noise feedback. And I'll unmute you now, caller ending in 311, and ask you to again introduce yourselves and tell us what's on your mind, please.
Sure, thank you, Donald. It's Mary Garish from Bennington. And I have a question that relates quite closely to Rachel's, particularly when she used the word collaboration, because I did kind of note that collaboration as a word is not used anywhere in the proposal, which I talks about community involvement, but I'm not sure that's quite the same. I realize I'm being very wonkish in distinguishing between the definitions of those two things, but at any rate, my real question deals with the broader issue of transparency. And you guys have spoken to the fact that there, links to websites and things like that, which is great, because I was going to ask about whether there would be a website and when it will be put up, hopefully as soon as possible. I guess the other thing is that I wondered about the possibility of establishing a Facebook page, because it's easier for people to make comments, ask questions, submit information on that than it sometimes is on a web page, depending upon how the web page is designed and by whom. And so I think, you've all stated, and I think that we all agree, that the community must be informed every step of the way as to what is going on. And so that means even in these first preliminary steps. And one of the things I just wanted to throw out there when Bruce was talking about policy, I just want to say that I've heard people talk about that the people who were going to write the policy were going to be professionals. And I get that, and there should be professionals. But after having worked with policies for many, many years, I can tell you that you don't, at least in my opinion, you don't just need people who are, the policy wonks and the professionals. You need people from the community, because the policy is only going to reflect the experiences of the people in the community if they have input. In other words, you might have a policy that some other town does that is just great, right? And it sounds good, except that in terms of our demographic and the experience that people are having with their encounters with law enforcement in our community, it's not the same at all. So I would just like to sort of flag that. And to go along with all that, you know, what ways will the community be invited to participate? And I'm particularly talking about, I love the idea of the library websites and all that, but I'm particularly talking about the most marginalized in our community because they are the ones that are having these experiences. Thank you.
So Mary, so I think Bruce should definitely answer some of this, but my understanding is that is the perfect kind of question to raise next week with Curtis in terms of how will that broader representation happen. And as you know, I mean, what we reported on tonight were the organizations that have commented back to us, but we reached out to others that we haven't heard back from about how they might want to be involved. So, you know, so while certainly that's not going to be the major way that we get information out or information in, it's one way. But I think we asked that same question of Curtis, and I think it's useful to talk with him about that next Wednesday night.
Okay, I'd be happy to.
I do think the language around providing for broader, greater community involvement is absolutely indicative of more collaboration. I do think that's the understanding there. Bruce, do you want to?
Yeah, it's Mary. It's certainly my understanding. And when it comes to your question, is exactly right in terms of drafting policy. One of my guiding principles when we're talking about policy is that the folks who are going to be affected by the policy have to be engaged in the process of drafting it.
Precisely.
So, yeah. So that would mean, for example, law enforcement would have to be involved in it, but also the community. And the community that engages with the police the most would be the group that I would be seeking to attract to this process. When I talked about professionals, what I'm talking about is particular people. I'm not really necessarily think of them as professionals, but I'm thinking of the people who have a great deal of skill or experience or knowledge about a particular topic. So if we're talking about working with spousal abuse, a policy on that, I would want to have somebody perhaps from PAVE involved in that process. In the same way that when we were working on school policies, and if it was a student policy, a policy that affected students, I tried to be a person who would take that out, well, first of all, to my own students, but to other students to see what their thoughts were on it and see if they could write responses or write amendments or changes that they would see in the same way I dealt with teachers or anything like that. So that's the idea. So your point is exactly correct. That's how it gets done.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mary, thank you for joining us. Do you have other questions tonight?
No, that's good for tonight. I will call back when Curtis is joining you to ask those other questions. Thank you.
Assuming we approve this, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for calling in tonight. You know, Bruce, I just would add, I love that your group is working so hard on this, and I appreciate your expressing the key components of the design principle, which are a lot of community engagement. I just also would ask that we not be that community that tries to DIY policy without relying on the vast amount of experience that's out there from communities that have already done this successfully. So I think
that's why you use model policies as well. That's what the IACP is about. But there are also other communities in the state which have policies that are always a good starting place. I think that, and I know the chief knows about that. I know that others on the force know about that. And I think there are some folks in the community who are experienced there. So absolutely, this isn't something where we're going to create fire, for instance. We don't need to do that.
Well, and a lot of people have made a lot of mistakes ahead of us from which we can learn if we've got our ears open. So I've got one more caller on the line. Again, Mary, I'm sorry, Mary, did you have one more thing to say?
No, I was just going to say thank you, and I'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye.
So I'm going to let the next caller in. Jeannie, I recognize this is sort of funny. I'm kind of letting you lead this conversation, but I've got control of the callers, so I'm going to let the caller in and then let you kind of take it from there. So caller ending in 037, I've just entered you into the Bennington Select Board meeting. And I'm going to ask you to take a moment, if you would please, to mute your phone, your tablet, your computer, your TV, your radio, whatever you've got running in the background so that we don't have any noise interference. Okay, caller in 037, I'm going to unmute you. Please give us your name and tell us what's on your mind.
I had a question. This is Lynn Mazza from Bennington. I had a question around the trainings. So on that deliverables list that you posted before, it lists that besides the select board and the town manager, the assistant town manager, the community development director, the chief of police, and the police lieutenant will receive professional development. But then if you go down to the bottom of that page, in the timetable section, it only shows that the select board and the town manager are getting the workshop, which leaves the question, when are the police and the other, the police lieutenant, the community development director, town manager, when are those folks going to receive what kind of trainings if they're not going to be part of that workshop?
Hi, Lynn. It's a typo. It should say, at the bottom, it should say conduct workshop for select board, town manager, assistant town manager. Well, yeah.
So that whole list of people should have showed up in both pieces.
Yeah, it should have been town management maybe, or leadership, but yes, it's a typo. So the idea is that training would include all of us in one room at the same time, and just it's probably more information than you want to know, but they wanted to make sure that it was not going to be a huge group, that it was a group that we could have meaningful, intimate conversation. But yeah, everyone that's listed in under number 1 deliverables should be included under activity.
Oh, okay, good. And then my other piece of that question, and this is the kind of thing I think I've asked this before, is so how will whatever comes out of that training be disseminated or shared with the communities? I mean, what I would really like to see is somehow having groups around the community have similar kinds of trainings concurrently with the select board, so that at the end of these trainings, everybody, the community, all the players, we're all kind of more or less on the same page, speaking the same language. And I'm wondering if those trainings can be somehow more broadly disseminated or used among the broader population.
Jean, I don't know if you want to, do you want to take this? Because you asked a lot of questions around this with Curtis.
I think I do remember him saying that the training for the initial training was, how do I say this? Going to be kind of cathartic and very personal on a personal level. That's what I do remember him saying, and they will be done in person, Lynn. We're not going to be doing this on Zoom. We have to find a space that's large enough to do it in person. It's an interesting question, and I'm not saying no to these trainings. It may be something slightly different, but I think that's where the breakout groups, the community discussions, that's where I could see some of this material probably being covered.
Well, Jean, I'm thinking also, you asked lots of questions around, could there be an outline that the community would have access to? And Curtis was saying, he could put together, he could give us something to share that says, here are the things we're intending to cover,
Right.
but it may or may not go that way.
Right. And our responses, it's not like we're going to end this training session with minutes. You know, it's not going to be like that at all. It'll be, I think it's going to be pretty private. So we feel free to talk and express ourselves in a really safe kind of
I mean, I understand that the individual training just for logistics, you know, needs to be for that smaller group, but I'm just wondering, can we all share in that some other way is kind of what I'm pressing for.
I can't imagine we couldn't, and maybe not to be redundant, but I'm sure you're willing to call in next week and ask Curtis directly your question. But I imagine that is absolutely going to happen in some fashion.
And Lynn, I would be supportive, not only if you ask that question, I really would be supportive of the idea of trying to find a way to share at least some of the resources or some of the process or some of the questions with the broader community, if it's at all reasonably possible, without knowing exactly what Curtis is planning to do with us. It's hard for me to say yes, no, but I agree with the sentiment of what you're trying to get at. Exactly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Lynn, other questions from you? I mean, I think, I'm afraid a lot of these questions we have not answered, maybe to your three of you full satisfaction, but except to say that there's been a lot of conversation, I guess, at the work group level, right, Jeannie and Jean and Bruce, and that Curtis will be able to bring a little bit more light in this. I don't know if it's worth reading this stuff out loud. I know, Lynn, that you've read it, and it probably makes a lot of sense to you, I hope, but that training you're talking about really is about pretty nuanced stuff. Areas of value clarification, core operational values, resistance to change theory, equitable business practices, mitigating the negative effects of bias, and the practice of cultural humility. So that's pretty good list for him to be working on.
And those are all topics that I think, just generally speaking, you know, everyone in the town can benefit from. So I'd like to, expand the conversation as much as we can. And I appreciate that you guys are looking towards that.
Okay. Other questions, Lynn, for this group? While you?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Good night.
Good night. So board, I'm going to ask if there's any other. I see a hand up from Dan Monks. So go ahead, Dan.
So I just wanted to clarify, because there's some discussion about Colin Curtis, et cetera. And I think that the way this was imagined, and Jeannie, Bruce jump in, that Curtis was really going to control this. It's his presentation, it's his meeting, it's not a select board meeting. So I don't want to promise to folks what that format's going to be without knowing how Curtis is going to run that meeting. So I'm a little nervous about promising how Curtis might deal with the public in that meeting. So maybe you guys have had a better understanding of that than I did.
Dan, I think, Bruce and Jean, jump in if this isn't your memory, but there was discussion about this would be a time when the community could voice their concerns and make their comments, and that he would respond to it, that he saw this as a time to say, here's what I'm proposing, community, give me feedback.
That's in my notes.
Great, that's perfect. I didn't recall the specifics of so that's great, and we'll find a way to make sure that that Curtis understands there's a deep desire to have a ability to ask questions.
Sure.
I see Jim has his hand up, and it's a little hard to see that, but Jim, if you've got a question, go ahead.
Yeah, just more to Lynn Maz's point. Although that during these, for lack of a better phrase, are going to be lectures. The policing environment, policy relationships, etc. Would it be possible for us to record them and then let people peruse them, so that people could have a greater understanding? Because I think Lynn makes a lot of sense,
So Jim, these are not lectures. These
No, that was just
are one-on-one these are sessions with us to really allow us to think about our values, about bias, about discrimination. So the answer to whether it can be taped is absolutely no. But what Curtis did say is that he can provide information about what he intends to cover. His caveat was that depending on where the group is, he and Dr. Gannon may spend more time on certain things and not get to other things, or, it may not play out exactly the way the outline looks, but these are intended to be deeply personal sessions. So we would not want them to be recorded. And I think the public would understand that. I mean, they're welcome to know what we're going to be discussing, but but not our grappling with pieces of it. Bruce, you have anything you want to add to that?
I'm just curious. I was thinking about Lynn's question as well. Should we be thinking about or seeking advice from other people in the community for people that could facilitate some of these breakout community meetings? Maybe we don't need Curtis to do all of them. I'm sure he, would if he could, but for the amount of money we're paying him, there may be a limitation to how many times he wants to do this. But there's probably people in our community who could facilitate some sort of a community, quote unquote, training session.
I think let's start with, he's proposed that he will lead these sessions. So let's see where that takes us. He's got 60 hours of facilitation, monitoring, and coaching included in the proposal. So, I don't know. It feels like maybe we'll, we may want to extend this past 6 months, which is the projected timeline for this. So, yeah, I'm sure you're right.
Right. But we are hiring a consultant who has a lot of experience in this to help us map this. So let's not get too far ahead in terms of what that looks like. Good suggestion, Jane. But maybe let's let this play out with Curtis a little bit, and if we decide to go that way, which I hope we will. Jim, you have your hand up again. Is that the same hand or is that a different hand?
No, it's a different one.
Okay.
It's my right hand.
Go ahead.
I just want to reemphasize the point that Lynn has made, Lynn Mazza, and that is, and other members of the community. I think it's so important that we be as transparent as possible during this, and whatever we can do to make sure that happens I think is so important to the work that we're going to start on.
That's great. Design, it's certainly a design principle that I've heard from the work team, but also along with that, asking for help when we need it, seeking expertise where it's available, trying to get out of our comfort zone a little bit, and looking for a slightly new way of making this inquiry happen. So all those things kind of going on at once, and transparent to boot. So, all right. Well, listen, we've had a good conversation about this. I don't know if the board needs to have more conversation. I think I'd like to thank the work team again for working on this. My preference would be that we accept this proposal, that we move forward with this man that we know is a man of integrity and somebody who will challenge us and push us hard, but also help us get to good places. And so my hope would be that somebody in this board would make a motion to approve this work plan.
I'm perfectly willing to do that, but if Sarah wants to do it instead of me, that's perfectly fine.
I do have one question before we approve this, and it may be already answered, but I would just like to re-ask it if that has been. The workshop that we will be doing, that will be all together, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then I'm set to go forward, and I can second Bruce's, or I can make the motion?
Go ahead and make it. I'll second.
Okay, all right. I make the motion to move forward with the proposal.
Okay, and Bruce has seconded it. Dan has his hand up, and before he speaks, I would like to say, just to close the loop on money, you know, we're looking at a $24,700 bill here. We have $20,000 from the community who have offered to help us with this, knowing that this community is worth investing in. And so that would mean the town would need to come up with $4,700. Stuart, I guess I'd look to you or Dan for a little bit of reassurance that that's a manageable amount that we could come up with for this process. Dan, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to answer both that and whatever else is on your mind?
But I'll let Stuart answer the budget question because that's
Okay.
his bailiwick.
Okay.
It's certainly manageable. Certainly, this donation is going to be a tremendous help to us. I was really scrambling about where those monies would come from, and I think we can manage the 4,700 that we need to find.
Dan, go ahead.
Just to clarify on the motion, it is a motion to approve the scope of work. I would just to make it clear that you add that you authorize the town manager to sign an agreement to proceed so that we can get Curtis going tomorrow.
Yes.
Thank you,
Okay,
Dan.
so the motion is to authorize the manager to sign this and move forward with this
Scope of work.
scope of work as Dan described. And that has been seconded. Is there any further discussion at this point? No? All right, well then I guess I would ask you all to unmute yourselves and please, if you support this motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed or abstained? All right, that's great. Thank you very much. This is a good step forward. Feel really good about this. It's going to be a very interesting next 6 months, and I look forward to working with people throughout the community and the police department and all sorts of people to try to make this work better for everybody. Jeannie, any last thoughts before we move into executive session on this process?
No, I think we're really excited. Curtis Reed is an amazing asset to this process for us, and I think we're really lucky to have him. So thank you for the approval.
Great. Well, I'm thankful to have a board that wants to be active on this subject. So we're all good. All right. Well, that's it for water and sewer budgets and for moving forward with the scope of work. So we do have a need to go into executive session on a personnel matter. I guess I would ask Dan and Stuart to stay with us. Mike Cutler, last time I forgot to thank Cat TV for the incredible service you give us, and so I'm going to thank you twice tonight. Thank you. Thank you. It really is wonderful to have Cat TV bringing this, and although we look forward to the time when the COVID-19 pandemic is over, we are really appreciative of everything Cat TV does to make it possible to communicate, at least in this limited form, with our community. So thanks, Mike. Thanks, Cat TV. I guess at this point, I'm going to ask for a motion to go into executive session. We will quickly, hastily add that we will not be making any decisions in this executive session, and there will be no votes taken, and we will not come out and take a vote. Under those conditions, could I get a motion to go into executive session, please?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Thank you. Yep, Jim and Bruce. All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So Nancy, we're gonna have to ask you to go have some supper. And Mike Cutler, you too. Thank you very much for joining us. And the rest of the board will move on with our executive session. Good night, Bennington.